Hi guys, got another video for you and a quick comparison between three cameras. Today we've got the A6500, we've got the A7S II, we've got the Canon 5D Mark III. The comparison really is for video purposes only because out of all of these you're going to be looking at the Canon for pictures followed by the A6500 and A7S, which really isn't the greatest for photos. But this is primarily a video review. The reason for it is because recently pretty much everybody making videos, documentaries, wedding videos, moving over to the Sony, seeing better low light, better sharpness, better dynamic range. The Canon has always been a fairly soft picture, which doesn't mean it's not been an outstanding camera, but I think people are moving on to something a little bit better, stabilized. So what we're going to do is have a look at the video of all of these. Mainly what we're looking at is sharpness and detail. I think if we're looking at ISO performance, there's thousands of tests. The A7S Mark II is going to, blow both of these out of the water. It's no competition here with any other camera. This one just wins that one by itself. But it's not often we all need to go to ISO, million, whatever it is. Usually we're in the 2 to 10,000 ISO range, depending if the lighting gets dimmer wherever we are, especially if we're indoors. So this is where we're going to see who comes out on top, and you might be surprised because all the talk is about how soft the Canon is, but personally when I put it on a TV, it looks pretty good to me. Yes, on PC screens it looks different, but I've tried it on 2 or 3 different TVs and the picture looks great. But that is the same with these two here. The imperfections you notice on PCs and monitor screens, I'm not sure why. Maybe the monitors have got so much more resolution, or they're sharper. Well, some of the ones I have are fairly sharp, so maybe they pick out more blemishes or noise, and TVs don't seem to do that. So really, we're going to have a comparison as the weather's good. It's not going to be getting too good soon. We're going to look in the daytime, how they look, how their colours look. Everything is going to be on auto, just so we can see how well they compare, especially with the dynamic range, with their own colouring, and which one just looks better. Sometimes the sharpest one doesn't look the best. So we're going to check that. When it gets a little bit darker, we're going to have a little nighttime ISO test. The test ideally are going to have a little bit of movement in. So that is if you're looking at something static, you don't get a perfect judgment of sharpness. So we're going to try and get a bit of movement. Maybe we're going to be focusing on some trees because you're going to get a lot of movement with the leaves. And then if you're going to see any noise, you're going to see it, really amplified in trees as compared to people. So we'll see how this goes. Also we'll have a little talk about the features because they've all got very different features. We're not going to talk too much about the Canon. You all know what it does. Point, shoot, you need to control everything yourself. These two do have autofocus. We're going to look at a little bit whether it's any good. We're going to decide that as well. So hopefully it's going to be an informative review. Again, as with all my reviews, these guys are going to get one test each. If it's out of focus, then I'll give them another test, but that's the way you really get to see how good a camera is. It's got one chance and one chance only. Okay, so let's get them tested. So from left to right, we've got the Canon 5D, A7S II in the middle, and the A6500. On the right, I think what we're going to do is do the test fairly wideish with the Sigma 35mm because that is by far the sharpest lens at 35, and you stop it down to somewhere, anything above even f2, it is so sharp. So we're going to go with that one, planted on each and every one, so you get a similar playing field. Okay, mic check. So our test isn't particularly scientific, but what we currently have is several different shades of lighting. The settings of the camera are shutter speed of 50, f16 and ISO of 640. So we're going to do them all like this. Hopefully the weather stays exactly the same for all the shots as the sky is currently blue. So we're going to have to take them fairly quick as well, just to make sure that the sun doesn't drop on us. But unfortunately we don't seem to have any wind, so we've got no moving trees, but hopefully the little bit that we do have you can spot the detail from. And why this scene is very good is because it's fairly dark where the shed is, or the room that we've got here, and also you see a lot of shade on the trees on the right hand side, and then bang, the sun is really hitting the trees in front. Again, auto white balance as well, so that is the Canon in this scenario. We're also going to do the same again when it's darker to see what we get. So now what we've arrived at is the Sony 6500. We've had to cheat on this one a little bit because we've swapped the lens out and used a Sony 18-105. The reason for this was because the 35mm just looked too different. Of course, this being a crop sensor, it wasn't a very even image quality we were going to get. So again, all the settings are the same. f16, ISO 640. Again, this is saying it's slightly overexposed on this as well compared to what the Canon was. So this is saying this is 0.7 overexposed. So to bring it down in line, we're going to drop it down to ISO 500. Oh, it's flickering between correctly exposed and 0.3, so we'll say this is perfect. So yeah, this is ISO 500. So the Canon at no point seems to be letting in more light. Is this the sharpness test as well? According to the screen, the Sony maybe looks a little bit out of focus, but it could just be, you know, how I've set the thing up. But I've set the focus point on the in the correct place, in exactly the same place, and I've fiddled with it, and it looks as clear as it's going to get through the EVF viewfinder. But on the screen, it just doesn't look that clear. Maybe the screen is just not as good as that found on the other two. So what we've got next is exactly the same settings, but we're looking at the A7S Mark II. Now, to me, this, even the screen is telling me this is overexposed by about 1 stop, whereas the Canon on the exact same settings wasn't. So what we're seeing here is the sensor itself, because the pixels are so much bigger, what we're finding is it's just taking in a lot more light than it should. So if we get it exposed to the correct, you know, level it should be at, which I'd imagine is going to be ISO 320, ISO 400. It looks a lot similar to what it says. Now it's you know, perfect. Looking at the screen as well, it does look a lot better. You know, and the settings are currently set to standard and auto white balance. You know, how good does that? Yes, definitely auto white balance. Looking on the screens of both cameras, I'm just looking at the 5D in my hand. I can see the 5D's colours do look better, but you know, obviously I'm just looking at the screens at the moment, so we'll transfer that. So we are going with the A6500 first. It's got darker. We are at ISO 8000. Unfortunately, there is no wind, so we're not going to get any of that movement we were hoping to get through the trees. There is literally not a single moving leaf. Almost looks like a picture. But unfortunately, that is what we are dealing with. So we are at ISO 8000. If you can see how we're doing here, exposure is perfect. Again, what we'll do is we'll bump it up to 12800, which would be our final test, and all these tests are going to have to be done really quickly to make sure we keep the same amount of light. So now we're overexposed by 0.7. Everything looks good. We are recording in an MP4 format because we'll go through that in a little while. But that is 12800 on the A6500. We're going to, as fast as we can, switch over to the Canon. Now, interesting here is it took me, I would say, about 20 or 30 seconds to just swap one camera to the other and hit record. and the same settings here at IS8000, it just looks very underexposed. So the Canon here is definitely struggling, I think, to get as much light into the sensor, but we're just going to bump it up to as far as the Canon goes, which is 1280, and we still are underexposed by one stop according to the camera. So what we'll do is we'll get it correctly exposed. That is bang on perfect. Of course, on the screen and the colours, everything looks lovely. How will it look on the PC when we get it on there is another matter. For now, all looks excellent on the Canon front at 12800. And now we're going to move very swiftly to the A7S, which of course at even 12800 we're not going to see any noise, but we will see how sharp it is. So here we are with the A7S, similar settings. I'm guessing it's got a little bit darker since I started this. It's only been a couple of minutes, but so we're now showing 0.3 under at ISO 8000. But if we just go straight up to whatever we want to, really, ISO 20000 we're at, and we'll probably notice that it's probably sharper, clearer. Everything's probably better on this thing, less noise, and yeah, everything's looking good in the viewfinder. Let's see what we can push it up to, though. We can push it up to, forget 8000, we're on 80,000. Let's get our f-stop up to try and get things correctly exposed. Let's even push our shutter speed up. Oh, it's not really going to work. Well, now we're really high. Instead of 6,400, we're at 64,000. So it's totally not in comparison, but the A7S is a very different camera to the others with its much lower pixel resolution and its bigger pixels. So we've had a minute to reflect and review all three cameras. It was not a scientific test. I know people are like, oh, it's got to be perfect, you've got to use Carl Zeiss lenses, etc. But it is what it is. So on the surface of things, in 1080p everything looks a bit similar. You know, it was a long shot pitting a 6500 against a full frame sensor and just expecting the Sony to do better, because this is what everyone says it is. What I've tried to do is have a look in, you know, not real term, because some of those comparisons are very similar, but you're going to see sharpness at exactly the same settings. We want to see the sharpness, and through the light we had some dark scenes, bright scenes, you get an idea of dynamic range and sharpness. I think on the whole, looking back, the A6500 picture is better than the Canons. We're not comparing the A7S anymore because it is just so much better. But the A6500 is better than the Canon, I think. But is it much better? Now, the benefits there are, for my 1080p, I'm getting slow motion, 120 frames a second, 100 frames a second, 50 frames a second, all on 1080p. Where that 5D has aged so much, the 1080p picture is all it has to offer. You know, people are saying, oh, the colours on the Canon are better. You know, I don't know, they look very similar to me. Maybe the A7S colours look a little bit off. I've checked the settings, it was all standard. They look much better if I put the picture profile to vivid or landscape, but everything was auto. I hope we give you a little bit of insight on the picture quality of these two cameras. There are other benefits you need to think of. A6500 has autofocus. It's currently set to face tracking autofocus. So if I go out of focus at any point, you'll probably think it's not working so well. The A6500 also has image stabilization, which is great for photo and of course very big issue for video. If you're on a monopod especially, you'll always get shake. I find even the smallest shake if you're on a monopod with a non-stabilized lens or body. So what you have here is once you're on a monopod, it's rock steady. Handheld is a no-go unless you're shooting slow motion. It's not that it's stable, but it's not that stable. Uh, you know, if you were desperate and you were in a crowd or something and you need to get a video, then handheld is still better with stabilization than without, but you know, keep it a last resort. And the other thing we wanted to do is some face tracking of the autofocus, which we'll do in a separate video because I've still got this for another week or so, so we'll keep testing, doing some comparisons. There's a low light video comparison as well between the three cameras on another one of my videos, so check that out. But this was a little bit different where I tried to get as much detail in as we could. Before I sign off, I would say that checking the 1080p picture of the A6500, it looked soft. But I also did a video in 4K and that looked, as it would, you would think it should look, you know, twice as good or 4 times as good, which it's never going to be, but much sharper. I'm just wishing the 1080p was sharp as well. So those of you, any thoughts you have, leave them. Any comparisons you want, put them in the bottom. Just on the face of it, would I buy an A6500 as a backup camera? There is doubt. So it's not cheap, and if there's doubt, you don't want to just say, alright, I'm going to buy it and then live with doubt, because, you know, we don't need to live with doubt. We've got plenty of stresses, as everyone does. Doubt doesn't need to be one of them, especially at the price of 900, 1,000, you know, 1,100, whatever it is. The price keeps going up and down. So that's all for now. Hope to see you soon in a few other videos.